Hello, you're watching World Without Rule of Law. Welcome to today's premiere of the audio story EMP Series, Grid Down, Day 1. This is a reproduction of the original story that premiered on my YouTube channel back in October of 2016. This reproduction will reflect some upgraded audio improvements, and I hope you enjoy it. EMP Series, Grid Down, Day 1. I woke up to an eerie quiet. It seemed early, but the alarm clock on the night table had no power. I picked up my cell phone, but it had no power either. That was strange, I thought. I got up and looked outside. My wife's car was gone, as it usually was when I got up. She was an early riser and did more before 6 a.m. than a lot of people did all day. She started work at 7 and was usually up for at least 3 hours by then, had done a load of laundry, swept the kitchen and living room, fed the cat, and made my lunch before heading off to work. She was the virtuous woman described in the book of Proverbs, chapter 31. I worked second shift and generally slept till 9 or so, got up and enjoyed a cup of coffee while doing my daily devotions. My wife and I both were doing a chronological study of the Bible. She did her devotions with her coffee at around 4 a.m. and would sometimes leave me notes of thoughts that she had about the verses of Scripture we read that day. When I opened the cupboard to get the coffee out, I saw a note she left me that morning. It was a smiley face that simply said, "I love you," on a Post-it note. Sometime earlier that year, I had purchased a coffee press and just loved it. It didn't take electricity. I just had to boil a cup of water on the stove, run it through the press with some nice dark roast coffee that I like to make very strong. When I turned the gas burner on to light it, I didn't hear the clicking of the electronic ignition, but I did hear the flow of propane coming from the burner. What was going on, I thought. After trying to turn on the lights, I realized we had no power. I guess that happens once in a while. No big deal. I got a match, went back and turned the gas on again and lit the burner. After I made my coffee, I sat down to do my devotions and drink my first cup of the day. I'd seen my wife's coffee mug in the drain board. She uses a drip coffee maker, so I knew that the power was on when she first got up. Just about that time, I looked outside and saw Dan and Martin, my two neighbors, out at the end of Dan's driveway talking. Seemed odd because while they were always cordial and friendly with one another, they never really seemed like friends. I walked out onto the porch and yelled over, "What's going on? Nobody works around here anymore?" They glanced over, both of them with a look of concern on their faces, and didn't say anything. They started walking over to the porch where I was standing. They told me that they also had no power and both of their trucks wouldn't start. Dan's Explorer was older, but he always kept it in tip-top running order. Martin worked for the city, had a brand new company pickup that he just got 2 weeks ago. Now I knew something was wrong. And judging from their demeanor, they knew it too. Dan was a few years older than I was. He was a veteran. Navy, I think. He and I would talk at the fence while shoveling our driveways, or washing our cars, or whatever else brought us out to the fence. I liked Dan and enjoyed talking with him. I wouldn't say we were friends. I'd been here 6 years and never once been in his house, or he in mine. Martin was a little more standoffish. We basically just exchanged pleasantries when we saw each other. I could count on one hand the number of times we had an actual conversation. I was a prepper. I had food, guns, ammo stored along with water and other essentials. I never told either of those guys anything about what I had. I knew Dan was into guns, but knew very little about Martin. A couple times I'd thrown a couple vague references out to Dan about the current state of our nation and the need to be prepared in an attempt to feel him out and see where he was with prepping. He never bit, so I dropped it after a few times and let it be. We didn't know it yet, but the country was not the same place it was yesterday, and was about to get much worse very quickly. Dan's wife passed away almost 2 years ago now, and he lived with his new lady friend. I didn't really know her. We said hi to each other in passing. That was about it. Martin lived with his girlfriend, who was a bit younger than him. They both had children of their own and also had a 2-year-old girl together. Martin's children were older. One of them was off in college, and the other had just graduated high school, lived mostly with his mom. Martin's girlfriend was very friendly. We would chat sometimes during the day if I was out working in the yard or in the garden, and she was outside with the children. It occurs to me that we have some really great neighbors, but I didn't really know any of them as well as I should have, having lived there as long as I did. Being a prepper, I know the importance of having a support group or mutual assistance group in hard times. I always worked on that aspect of prepping, but truthfully it was very hard. In some cases, the people closest to us were on a different page when it came to prepping. Some even thought I was downright nuts. Then I would come across those who were into prepping, but didn't seem like anyone I would trust enough to form such an alliance with. Heck, if someone I knew casually was willing to reveal so much about their prepping status to me, how could I trust them? Prepping wasn't a game for me, it was real. Martin told me that Ellie, his girlfriend, left the house just after 7 to bring her kids to school and go to work herself. By now, several other neighbors came out and reported that they too had no power and that their vehicles were all dead as well. I was very concerned at this point, but tried not to show it. I pulled Dan aside, shared my concerns with him. I told him I feared that this was a huge problem, beyond anything this small group of neighbors could anticipate. We decided to take a walk down the hill to the main road, check things out. I grabbed my Sig Sauer 1911 .45 and 2 full mags. Dan only had rifles, so I gave him my Ruger P95 and an extra mag, and told him I thought it would be a good idea for him to hold on to it for our walk. When we got to the bottom of the hill, at the main road, my worst fear was realized. As far as we can see in both directions, there were cars stopped dead on the road. There were people everywhere, confused and helpless. Actually, clueless was a better description. Dan and I looked at each other, and I could tell he had some idea what was happening. We decided to turn around and go back up the hill right away and report back to the other neighbors. The small group of neighbors didn't know what to make of the situation. The hill we lived on had one very steep road leading up to a 3-way intersection, which dead-ended very quickly in all 3 directions. I told my neighbors that I thought it prudent to take turns watching the road, and they all agreed. George, my neighbor to the left, said he would take the first watch. He could actually sit at his dining room table and look out his French doors to an unobstructed view of the entire hill, almost all the way down to the main road. I gave him a whistle and told him if he saw anyone attempting to walk up the hill to give 3 short, loud bursts, followed by 1 long, loud burst. He agreed. Our houses were all in close proximity, and we were sure we would all be able to hear the whistle. I went in and immediately went to my gun safe, took out my Mini 14, my shotgun, and my Smith & Wesson M&P rifle. All my spare mags were loaded, and I switched out the 10-rounders on both my rifles for a 30-rounder for the Mini 14 and a 25-rounder for the 22. Yes, I knew they were illegal in the communist state I lived in, but at this point, I cared even less than I normally did for our ridiculous gun laws. I was one of the good guys, an NRA lifetime member. No honest, decent citizen had anything at all to fear from me. I placed the P95 I had lent Dan for our walk onto a shelf just inside the front door, and the rifles by the side door where I could quickly and easily get to them. I strapped the shotgun over my shoulder and started to think about the rest of my day. It was now 12:30 according to my wind-up watch, which I kept in my safe. My main concern was for Linda. If Martin saw Ellie drive off at just after 7, it was a safe bet Linda was already at work before the EMP went off. I'm assuming it was an EMP attack. What else would take out the power grid and vehicle power as well? That reassured me a little, because we had gone over certain scenarios in case of an event like this took place. The church we attended was 8/10 of a mile from Linda's work, and she knew that from work that was her best and most immediate plan of retreat. It was on a main road, but it sat on just over 10 acres of land. The associate pastor and his pregnant wife and their 11-month-old son lived in a house on the property, and I knew Linda would be safe there with them, at least for a little while, providing she could make it there, which I was confident she could. The short walk was down a side road which intersected the main road about 200 yards up from the church entrance. Once there, she would be safe. Aaron, our associate pastor, wasn't a prepper to my knowledge, but he was a hunter, and I know he has guns. I had buried 5 5-gallon buckets of food, water, and a larger barrel of other essentials on the property. Linda and I were the only ones who knew where they were. When she got there, they could dig them up, if and when they needed to. She also had 3 days' worth of food in her backpack, which was always in her car. The larger problem was me getting there. It was obvious my neighbors were coming unraveled quickly, and that without any decent stores of food and water, they could potentially get ugly very fast. It was becoming increasingly evident that I would not be sleeping in my own bed tonight. It was about 8 miles to the church, all along a very main secondary highway. I had an alternate route that took me through a soccer park, a state park, and several miles of old abandoned railroad tracks, and only very minimal road exposure. I estimated that route to be closer to 12 miles. I grew up in this town and spent many hours as a young man hiking and riding my dirt bikes in the state park and on the trail that ran adjacent to the train tracks. I was confident of the route, and I knew it like the back of my hand. I decided to leave at dusk. It was just past half moon last night, and I knew I would have enough light to see by on most of the route, yet little enough to covertly move about as needed. I loaded my backpack with a few clothing items, some ammo, and other essential items, and put the Ruger P95 in the side pocket. I'd been dehydrating various foods continuously for the last year or so. Because they were light, I filled the remaining space in my pack with them. Also in there was the Mini 14 with the stock folded back. I'm glad I purchased that stock for the rifle. I knew it was also illegal in this state, and because of that, I almost decided not to. But after my pack was stuffed full, I forced my Bible in on top and pulled the drawstring tight, buckled the lid closed over it. It was fall, but seasonably warm. I'd put my parka liner in the ruck, but planned to wear the thin shell to conceal the pistol grip Mossberg 12 gauge that would hang from a strap around my right shoulder. I still had 2 buckets each of black beans and rice, as well as 5 totes full of various dehydrated and canned foods, and 2 70-gallon barrels of fresh water left in my basement that I couldn't take. My main plan had always been to shelter in place, so the majority of my stock was here. I did have stuff buried in a few different locations, though, and would have to rely on those stores now. I told Martin and Dan that what was left in the house was for them to share and wish them the best of luck. What I hadn't told them was that buried in my yard behind the garage were 12 more buckets of food and a 500-gallon poly septic tank that I purchased new and buried and loaded with canned goods, ammo, and all sorts of goodies. I wasn't about to tell them about that, just in case I had an opportunity to return at some point to claim it. Ellie went upstairs and came back with a radio that you could power by winding it up, or with a solar panel that was on the radio. It had several bands, including a ham radio band for listening only, and a weather band and an FM/AM radio bands. She said she had purchased 4 of them for the family to use canoeing and camping, and that she wanted me to have one. I gratefully accepted it and clipped it to the molly webbing on my ruck. I had a similar one, but it was buried at my lot in Vermont. I had meant to get 1 or 2 more, but never got that far down on my prep list. Our prep budget, being what it was, hadn't allowed it yet. Dan was a musician and a patriot, apparently. He came out with a small yellow flag with a coiled up snake and the words, "Don't tread on me," printed on it. I had seen this image before. He told me that if I displayed it, it would identify me as a patriot, that if I saw others display it, it meant that they quite likely could be trusted. I thanked him, shook hands with my neighbors, and knelt down and prayed to God for safety, for Linda and for myself. Then I got up and walked off into the twilight. I looked back at the house for what I believe would be the last time.